Most people don't realize how much their personal information is being bought and sold every day. Data brokers are making billions, pulling details about you from public records and the internet, and then packaging and selling it, usually without your consent. That's how your information lands in the hands of scammers, spammers, even stalkers. It's why you get endless robocalls and why ads seem to follow you everywhere. That's where Aura comes in. Aura actively removes your data from broker sites and keeps it off. They also instantly alert you if your information shows up in a breach or on the dark web. But Aura goes beyond data protection. With one app, you get a VPN, antivirus, password manager, spam call protection, dark web monitoring, and even up to $5 million in identity theft insurance, all backed by 24/7 US-based fraud support. Other companies might sell just credit monitoring or just a VPN. Aura gives you all of it, together, at the same price competitors charge for just one service. Start your free trial today at aura.com/remove. Protect yourself now at aura.com/remove.
It's really remarkable that sometimes we can grow up in the same household and have two very different experiences. And sometimes those experiences cross paths and lead us to this place where we come together as family members, friends, compatriots to change the world. And that is exactly how today's guests, Kathleen Harnish McKune and Karen Dickerson, has come together to change the world. My friends, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, thank you.
You know, one of the things that I'm really excited about, and this is never, we're 1,000 episodes into this podcast, I have never sat down with siblings to talk about this journey. Mine included, which I've asked multiple times. I'm like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be on camera. I was like, I get it. Trust me. And so for those listening, just to kind of start off, why should anyone listen to our conversation today? What are they going to take away from this experience with us?
They're going to take away really a skill that every human needs to ensure you have as strong resilience as possible. And that is learning how to emotionally regulate yourself, and then also the power of self-care.
We're going to go deep into that. And you know, obviously these are some conversations that we've had over the years on this show. But one of the reasons particularly I wanted to have this conversation with you together was because I think about the reality that so many people come from these massively traumatic experiences. And often, I mean, more often than not, people have a sibling. And you tend to see, at least in my experience now, having interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people, coached thousands of people, you tend to see it really be like one person in the family kind of takes that step, while others you see walk a very different path. And we know that the impact of trauma can lead you down a litany of different avenues, but predominantly it's not good. I'm curious for you, what was this process like for you to decide to go on this healing journey, both independently and together? How do you get to where you are today as siblings when so many people are suffering because they're like, I'm listening to the podcast, I read the books, I'm going to therapy, I've got the coach, I've got the mentor, I can't get my brother to do it, I can't get my sister to do it. What has this process and journey been like for you?
You know, Karen, you might share because you really started your healing first. And I think that was critical in my mind.
For me, I, of course, endured very violent sexual abuse and trafficking and a litany of other things growing up as a child for most of my 18 years. So when I went to college my freshman year and came home on my spring break, I was told by my father that I would be returning home for the summer, getting a job, helping out my mother, and I knew exactly what that meant. I would be leaving a boyfriend and I would be back in his lair again. And I just couldn't tolerate that anymore. Although I was deathly afraid, I just decided at that moment that I would do either, I would tell my boyfriend what had been happening. I would let him know that I planned to leave college and I didn't know go where. I also thought about ending my life. And then when the conversation occurred, when I got back to college, he instantly said, well, if I marry you, he'll leave you alone. So we kind of went down that path. We did go ahead and get married in secret, so to speak. But my mother did find out about it right before we got married, and my father did try to intervene. So we were forced to actually leave the state, and we moved 2 states. We moved up to Iowa from Kansas. And I started my life as a married person away from my family. And I literally stayed away from all contact with my family for 4 to 5 years, including my identical twin sister. So for me, I needed that break. I needed to call the abuse what it was, and I needed to get therapy, of which I did. I had 4 years of intense therapy in my early 20s.
And so to then kind of catch you up, as a lot of you that have grown up in homes like we did, ours was riddled with incest, abuse, and neglect. Our father was very keenly manipulative. He knew how to create strife between us, competition between us. We really didn't have a relationship. I was kind of the mom of the family. I took care of things in that regard, but I was very walled off, my protective mechanism. And we just didn't have a relationship that was a sibling relationship. I was kind of the mom, and I was really busy just doing, right? Just trying to help the family survive. So when Karen left the family, I didn't really understand completely everything and why, and I was still under my dad's control, and I did not know, nor did any of us know. Karen knew more about what was going on with each of us, but I didn't. I had no idea because my dad kept telling me I was special. I was the wife of the family, the second wife. I was like the second mother. You know, I had this I'm special, I'm different, and I thought I was the only one. And so fast forward, we didn't talk about this with each other. And then in April of 2017, I do strategic facilitation for my for-profit work. And I was facilitating the bringing together the trauma-informed movement in Kansas City with the one in St. Louis. And on this particular day, the folks from St. Louis said, hey, we're going to do our Trauma 101 training. Kathleen, you can kind of sit at the back of the room, listen, and then pop up and facilitate after. So I was sitting there listening, and about 7 or 8 minutes in, they bring up ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. I'm 56 years old. I've never heard of this. So I listen, and I'm a math head, and it's a 0 to 10 score. And I'm like, okay, we're supposed to write our ACEs down. I'm looking around the room assessing, and I'm thinking, okay, everybody will be 5 or 6. I know I'm a 9. I'm going to write down an 8 because I don't want to be too far out of the average. So they popped up the scores, and almost everybody in class had 0, 1, or 2. And I literally said to myself, oh my gosh, they really lied. I should have lied more. I'm this outlier. Then they pop up the data for Kansas and Missouri. And I suddenly, for the first time in my life, understood that the childhood that we had was nothing like what most people did. 2.5% of those people in Kansas and Missouri reported having a score as high as my sisters and I. So I called Karen on the way home, and I said, oh my gosh, we have to study this. Karen, this is something we have to talk about. The trauma that we went through is why one of us has a chronic health condition every 2 years. There's stuff in here. We need to learn it. We need to understand it. I think it can help us better learn how to be able to use this information, at least for me particularly now, to learn how to heal rather than just manage my trauma. So she said yes.
Yes, I said yes. So it was shocking to me to hear that. And I thought to myself, well, I don't think I have a score of 10. I have a score of 20. Is there a score of 20? And we started talking about our journeys, and we had never really dipped into that, even with my identical twin sister. And so we started to talk, and Kathleen showed us the trauma, the neuroscience of trauma. We read about it. She did a white paper. She and I in particular read more and more and more about it, and started to make sense that maybe we should write down, our stories, and maybe we should start talking about them with other people and be brave enough to do that. And so that's what we decided to do in the summer of 2019. We started our journey of writing our stories and telling each other our stories. And that was very difficult because although we were all in the same family, as trauma happens to people, it can be the same event, but we can all experience it differently. And we can all have a different outcome about how our bodies and how we react to that. And what we found out is that our experiences were quite different from one another. And we had to start learning to talk about it and realize that maybe this is why we called my twin sister the Taz, and maybe I was the quiet one, and Kathleen was very organized and hypervigilant. And we just started discovering those things about one another. But it was a difficult journey because Kathleen was my mother, and I had to essentially tell my mother these things that happened. And very, very, very difficult for me to do. I don't have a memory eraser. I have everything in full, vivid motion picture. And so I remember things that she does not. And for a long time, my twin sister and I confessed to her then that we thought she just didn't care. But that wasn't the case at all. She just didn't know or remember.
Well, first, my thought is thanks for sharing all that. I resonate with so many elements of that. And I've shared this publicly on the show many times. I have an ACE score of 10. And that's growing up in a wildly abusive household. My mother cut my finger off when I was a kid, just sexual abuse in the church. I mean, the stepfather who put me in the hospital, uncle who went to prison, watching my mom get married and divorced 6 times. I mean, the whole 9. And I remember it's funny because that data and I look at the data on the ACE score, it's so old now. I really wish we could get that revamped. I've tried to do some work around that over the years. It's really hard to get stuff like that financed if you're not in a university. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. My point is it was probably 2012, 2013, and I was on YouTube, but this is the old days of YouTube. And I found this video of Dr. Felitti talking about the ACE survey. And it literally in that moment changed my life because I was in such a dark place and I didn't understand why. And I had these moments in my own journey of like looking at what was happening and transpiring. I'm like, this is not right. Like I got lucky in one sense because with my mother's drug addiction and then her multiple divorces, I often didn't know where I was going to end up. And so I would go from house to house to house. And between 8 to 12, I lived in probably 30 different houses, just never knowing where I'm going to land. One of the really interesting things about that, though, is I got to see families who were the polar opposite of mine. So I knew actually early on that the things that were happening in my home weren't normal. What I didn't understand until much later was that I could control in my home as an adult all of my own behavioral patterns because I was a fucking maniac. And I don't mean that lightly. It was drugs, alcohol, sex, hookups. Just impulsivity, like unbelievable chaos in my life. And I didn't realize that I was just like reinforcing all of the things that were my norm. We're going to talk about regulation here in a minute, and we're going to talk about how to get our brains and our bodies connected. I know huge work that you guys do. That to me meditation, journaling, that stuff is everything for me. If I don't do it, I know I don't do it. It impacts my life. Yoga, working out, eating well, all these things. But there's something that you brought up. I wrote some notes as you were talking. I wrote 2 notes. You mentioned this reality about competition between siblings. That is I don't think I've ever talked about that on this show before. And I just want to dive into that for a moment because I don't think people understand that this is actually happening. The reality of vying for love, attention, sometimes food, like whatever that thing is, when you have a parent or parents who are pitting you against each other, I would argue is probably the most detrimental experience that a child has. When, I had multiple siblings in my house growing up and we just went to war constantly with each other. In fact, one time I put one of my brothers through the drywall. I broke one of my hands on the other one's face. We were always, there's a scar on the top of my right hand. It's pretty faded now. He threw a brick at me. You know what I mean? It was always something crazy. And I didn't understand why we did it. I don't want to say we didn't like each other, but we had learned the language of communication was violence and anger and fear and neglect. And we just behaved that way. Very different now. You know, we've done a lot of work together. We've been able to walk this path a lot. But I want to sit in this for a minute because I think that it's one of those things that is maybe missed in a lot of siblings who grew up in traumatic households. What was it like for you to come to the realization of, wow, our childhood was just a pure competition? And then how did you mend that bridge to begin? I mean, God, you guys are sitting next to each other, for God's sake. Me and my brothers could never do that. You know what I mean? We talk to each other almost every single day now, but that was decades of work, right? So let's walk this path. What was it like growing up in competition? What did that mean? What did you witness? How did you understand it as an adult? And then how did you kind of mend those relationships with each other?
Well, I'll start because my reaction to the trauma was very different than Sharon and Karen's. So one of the things that our father, again, abusers are very good at isolating their victims and very good at ensuring that they can control them. And our dad did that. So every Sunday at dinner, Sunday dinners were not pleasant for us. We were compared and contrasted. We were ranked and rated. And whoever was bottom of the totem pole, which often was Karen, would endure, we found out later, a lot more abuse, but he didn't announce that because he just ranked and rated us, and he didn't say anything about what he was doing to each of us because he wanted to keep us separated. So that's kind of how it showed up. For me, quite young, I was 5 when I had my turning point moment in my journey of resilience. I just finished a big screaming match. I don't know, my 100th millionth with my father, and he used to berate me, call me every nasty thing you could call a little girl, laced with, good for nothing, dirty, blah, blah, blah. It was just all very foul. And luckily I was born very defiant. And so I was little bitty thing, and I can still see myself, my turning point moment, standing in our foyer of our Littleton, Colorado home, my little fists clenched and tears streaming down my face as I finished screaming at my father, "No, I'm not, Daddy. No, I'm not." And he always wanted to get the last word in, but what he didn't know is under my breath, I always said, "No, I'm not, Daddy." And that day, something happened. A voice from the depths of my soul came rising up, and it said to me, "You will be different. You are to make a difference." And it was in that moment, Michael, that my world shifted. And it's one of my very few full color motion picture moments. But that voice suddenly gave me purpose. I realized that I literally felt steel walls go up around me. I walled myself off. Anything from that day forward that didn't fit my perfect little world I created for myself, I literally dissociated. Did not happen, wasn't happening. It was out here. And my job was head down, eyes forward, driven by purpose, and just kind of get out of here. And so I just started, I was 5. I remember organizing the chaos in the home, kind of taking over, making sure we had meals, and literally all the stuff that happened outside of that, and then my memory eraser came on. I have this amazing memory eraser for personal things, not for work, not for strategy, but for personal. It just clicked in. And only now do I understand, and I'm 65, that those were all trauma responses, and they were beautiful and protective, and they helped me survive, but they've also made me dysfunctional in times and places in my adulthood. So I think for me, all that stuff that was going on, I'd hear my dad call my sisters awful names. "You're no good for nothing. You're worthless. You were mistakes. We should have never had you." And I took it in, but Michael, I didn't actually process it. It just went off those steel walls. So I was, I think, kind of lucky. And then I didn't have the violent abuse I had the loving abuse, right? And so it took me a longer time to realize, but I was separated from everybody. And I have felt for a really long time until Karen and I really connected that I am alone in this world. And if I don't do it, it's not going to happen. And I was very alone because the twins had each other and it was kind of me and the twins. And we often battled and fought. And I was super walled off. So I didn't make connections with anyone. I was the ice princess in high school, if that tells you anything. You could not get close to me if you, there's no way you could not get close to me. It was impossible. So not as a sibling, not as a parent, not as anyone. I was impervious to any kind of closeness. So Karen, is very different for you.
Yeah, for me, I was the child that wanted to save everyone. And so my badge of honor was that I had a high pain tolerance. And my badge of honor was that I could disassociate and actually leave my body and go somewhere else. So I thought it was my mission and duty to protect them. And by doing so, put up with the things that I was putting up with. But I saw my siblings as siloed off into their own space, and they very much were. Our older brother was, Kathleen was, my twin sister was, to a degree. However, what I have to say, and I've said to Kathleen, if I had not been born a twin, I would not be here. I know for certain that because I had the unconditional love of someone, which was my twin sister, we just had this bond, and we knew that no matter what, and even though we were told we weren't wanted, everything that happened to us, we knew we had each other. So that protected me in that regard. And then my turning point happened when I was 12. Again, I heard a voice, but it was because I had adopted a dog for the summer to tell all my problems to. And I happened to go upstairs one Sunday morning and catch my father with Kathleen. And for me, I had thought all along I had put up with everything so that I would protect everyone. And my world shifted right then and there because I realized I hadn't protected anyone. And so, I mean, the hardest story I had to tell Kathleen was the fact that I had planned on ending my life that day and my parents' lives. And as I went to take the knife that night to do so, my dog came in my parents' room and interrupted that and kind of snapped me out of that moment and took me out of the house. He literally grabbed my arm with his mouth. And I sat beside the river with him and heard a voice, again, some kind of knowing that said, you will continue to have this happen to you. However, you are full of love and you are meant to spread love in this world. You are meant to make a difference. You will survive this and you will eventually understand. And it was just like this knowing that made everything better for me, although it was rough because I had the abuse of my father and my grandfather. It really was a turning point for me. So I began to say, I'm going to be a nurse. I began to say, I want to understand why my parents are like this. And so that helped me survive. But as far as the competition, yeah, we all weren't very close to one another.
No.
Growing up, we also didn't talk about anything hard.
No.
But we didn't have the, occasionally Sharon and I would sit on Kathleen because we were bigger than she was when we were mad at her, but we didn't have beating each other up or anything like that. We just isolated ourselves.
We did. And I think so focused on survival, me just keeping the home together and making sure. And it was really that we didn't direct it at each other except for normal sibling stuff, but nothing like what you described, Michael, you had. It was simply highly, highly isolating. Highly isolating.
And
you were alone.
Yeah, I think that's very true of little boys versus little girls also in a lot of capacity too, and I think when I hear stories like yours, my first thought is, one, like, fuck, this is just the most horrendous thing people go through. And then the other thought is, I go, what happened to their parents? Because I have come to find very rarely is this a first generational thing. This tends to go back generation after generation after generation. And I think about the things that happened to my mother and my grandmother and my father. And, you take this all the way back to whatever ship you got on to get over here, right? And this goes on to the beginning of time. What I think is really difficult about this is like I don't know if this was true for you, but I had a really intensive, as a kid, I always had these visions, like I'm going to be something. Like I will be rich and successful and I'll be a rock star. And in some ways, like I've built that into my life. But there's also the complete and utter self-destruction that occurred like in my 20s. And something I've just every day I've got to be cognizant of. Like I think about like I'm standing with a match in my hand pretty much every day. And I've got to really pay attention to my actions, my thoughts, my body, the people I'm around, the conversations like this, and it's one of those things that over the years I've really learned how to navigate my own mind through all this. Not that sometimes it's not incredibly difficult, because like you, I have these thoughts and ruminating and like, oh man, I'll go murder that guy or that person and that'll make it better, or do this, or the suicidal ideations, whatever it is. And I think that people get so afraid to talk about those things because they feel like somehow they're weak, or somehow that if they do, then that means that the people that hurt them have won. And when I made the decision to start this show, almost a decade ago, it was kind of to have really hard fucking conversations like this, to sit in it and be like, okay, there are these things that happen, but there's also the backside of it. There is the reality that there's the moment of like actual real transformation. And I know each of you have kind of shared what that looked like for you. And for me, it was just rock bottom at 26 years old. I had destroyed my life and everything that I had built. And there was a requirement on the backside. It was like, all right, kill yourself or figure this shit out. That's kind of where I was, just in all honesty. I was like, all right, well, let's go fucking figure this out. Cause like killing myself, I feel like a bitch, So I'm like, all right, I'm going to go like work this out. And by the way, and I understand why people make that decision, because I've been there on the floor with a gun in my mouth. I have been there. For me, it was, I'm going to go ask for help. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what that feels like. I've shared that story on here a million times, so I don't need to walk through all of it. But effectively, I was just like, whatever it takes. I don't care what it takes. Whatever it takes, I'm going to get there. The beginning is so difficult. And I know that there are people listening right now, and they're like, I hear this. I've listened to 900 episodes of this podcast. I've read your books. I've done these things. I am so terrified of the first conversation. How do we step into that? I know a huge part of what you guys do is between your events, your retreats, your workbooks, your books, the things that you have put together to help people. I'm sure people must probably come to you with the same question. What's the starting point here?
Where we decided to help the world start is when we wrote our book, Remarkably Resilient Community Matters. We identified the 5 R's of resilience that matched our lived experience, informed by the neuroscience and neurobiology of trauma. I think really understanding that neuroscience and what's happening to your human stress response and what's happening to those patterns of thought is so important, because you turn that question from what's wrong with me, which is how I lived 55 years of my life, to no, it's what happened to me. And what happened to me isn't it happened to me and now that everybody else deal with it. No, it happened to me and now I must learn how to manage that with knowledge and skills and tools and help. And so we started with the R of regulation as the first one we wanted to move into action, into workshops, because we wish we would have known this when we left our homes, because even though we left our abusive homes, each of us after we finished high school, we were still highly dysregulated, and all those health impacts of that dysregulation kept pouring into us and resulted in a lot of conditions, both mental and physical chronic health conditions. And it's also the easiest step. What was so beautiful about it, when you were raised in the kind of home that we were raised in, there's so much that you don't have control over and so much that, the abuser is controlling. Learning about regulation and being able to choose it and recognize when you're dysregulated in your body is you. It's fully empowering. You don't need anybody's permission. You don't need anybody's blessing. You get to decide to get in touch with your breath, your heart rate, your sweat, when you can tell that your emotions are about to get the best of you, which means in a moment you're not going to be able to get to your thinking brain, which means you're likely to do or say something if the situation is not unsafe, right? You're just triggered, you're activated by a memory. Then you don't want to end up doing or saying something you later regret. And so I think for us, it was recognizing that dysregulation is a trauma response. For me, started at age 5. I remember it quite well. And now choosing, instead of being the hothead at home, like I was with my father, but it kept me safe, it helped me survive, but I was a hothead with anyone at home. And you just need to learn to deal with it, because I've been like this since I was 5 years old, and you just deal with it, right? Well, that's not fair because I don't need it. I'm safe. And I can choose to do a regulating technique to get that heat turned back down, that boil, and I can stay in my thinking brain and have an intentional response instead of an emotional reaction. So we wanted to really empower people with that kind of knowledge, because had we had it at 18, we love working with youth that are aging out of foster care and kind of trying to find their way. If they can learn to be regulated, we know, because the neuroscience and neurobiology tells us, if we can help get those cortisol and adrenaline levels down, we might be able to help in some prevention of some, adulthood kinds of chronic diseases that we have had. So that was just super important.
Most people don't realize how much their personal information is being bought and sold every day. Data brokers are making billions, pulling details about you from public records and the internet, and then packaging and selling it, usually without your consent. That's how your information lands in the hands of scammers, spammers, even stalkers. It's why you get endless robocalls and why ads seem to follow you everywhere. That's where Aura comes in. Aura actively removes your data from broker sites and keeps it off. They also instantly alert you if your information shows up in a breach or on the dark web. But Aura goes beyond data protection. With one app, you get a VPN, antivirus, password manager, spam call protection, dark web monitoring, and even up to $5 million in identity theft insurance, all backed by 24/7 US-based fraud support. Other companies might sell just credit monitoring or just a VPN. Aura gives you all of it, together, at the same price competitors charge for just one service. Start your free trial today at aura.com/remove. Protect yourself now at aura.com/remove.
I don't know what you would add to that, but...
Well, I would say for someone just starting out, the hardest thing is the first step. And I would also say, you've heard the saying, the truth sets you free. And it's absolutely finding someone that you're able to, that can be you can be a truth teller with. So that is the first step. And then looking inward, again, like Kathleen said, and saying, what behaviors do I recognize as trauma responses? Those might have helped me survive when I was young, but are they serving me well now? And I had to look at things like being a people pleaser. And what kind of relationships did that get me into? I had to look at the fact that I had no boundaries set. And what did that look like? And over time, once I've learned what my responses are and the things I can manage that I don't necessarily need now, I've changed several things in my life. Now, I had to uninvite some people into my life because they would constantly cross a boundary with me. And do difficult things like that. But the person that I am now is a lot different than the person who was 20 years old. But it took like you said, Michael, lots of therapy, both top down and bottom up, the somatic stuff. I'm a Reiki master healer now, and that works well for me. The Reiki works on me, but there's all kinds of therapies that people can dip their toe into to see whether it's helpful or not. And I would say it's just so worth it because we're all enough and we all are valuable and we all deserve love. And we all deserve a good life.
Yeah.
So it's important.
I agree. And the hard part about deserve is like, you got to do the work, you know,
You do.
and that's the unfortunate side because I think people will sit in the I deserve and they'll die completely unfulfilled because they never showed up. And that was me. I mean, God, it's like mimicking so much of what you're each saying is so true for me. I was the shut off guy. I don't talk to me. Don't connect with me. I'm a brick wall. You're not getting through no matter what, to this pivot of, right, how do I show up best for myself? How do I do the really scary thing of having conversations? You know, especially like, you know, I think it's probably very different for men. I'm 6'4", 225, covered in tattoos, and I've done martial arts and sports my whole life. To sit in a room with a therapist and be like, my stepdad beat me up when I was 8. That's a really hard experience, right? And that's one of those things that I encourage people to do because the truth does set you free. And it's like, you're going to walk around in a nightmare until you talk about it. And it's going to come, it's going to show up, it's going to present itself to you all the time until you get to this place where you go deal with it. And the regulation aspect of it is so unbelievably important. I'll never forget the first time I did like sound bowl healing meditation. I must have been, I don't know, I might have been 30. It's definitely over a decade ago. It was a long time ago, maybe a little younger. And I just remember the physical response my body had was the same response that animals have when they shake off trauma. And I literally went through this moment of my body just freaking out because I was so wound up and so tight for so long, which again, we know when you look at the survey research around the ACE score, the higher that score is, the more likely you're going to have a lot of dark, bad, horrible health conditions happen. And by the time I was 30, I'd almost died like 6 times, you know, and I figured out one day, I was like, oh my God, my nervous system is so dysregulated. I'm constantly in fight or flight. I have no regulation at all to my emotions. And kind of what you said, Kathleen, when I was young, I'd be like, this is how I am, deal with it. And that's the most dangerous sentence in any language, period, because that means you've already decided what your future is. And for the people who are listening, they're like, I don't really understand this idea of regulation. I'm exploding all the time at my kids or my husband or my wife or my coworkers or my friends. I can't seem to get out of bed. I'm always depressed or anxious. I can't seem to navigate life. My sex is horrible. My money is bad. I'm blaming the world. I'm pointing the fingers. I think the hardest part about that is like, yep, that's all valid. It's all valid, you know? And I think that people can get trapped in their own experience. And I know that I certainly have been that way. And there's something about this turning point where you actually have to choose yourself. And I don't know if you guys see that with the people that you're working with, but what is that like? What is the experience like? People are coming to you, they're saying, I'm going to choose me. I'm going to do this dark, dirty work. What is that? Where are they coming to you from? Why does that decision happen?
You know, we do our work primarily with individuals that are almost have to be brought together. Let me just say that, because we might come in a room where we're working with children that are aging out of foster care system and they've been brought there by the organizations that work with them, or we volunteer in correctional facilities, because what we know is every single person in that room, male or female, has complex PTSD like we do. And all we have to do is say one sentence, because they're like, what's this Johnson County, woman coming in here for? Well, I say a sentence and they're they're like, whoa, okay, you've been through shit. I've been through shit. I'm actually going to listen to you. So folks that come to us in workshops tend to come to us because they're in situations where they've already recognized that there's, something's amiss, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, the most rewarding, there's so many, but the most rewarding for me is afterwards when someone will come up to me and say, oh, wow, I always thought that I really was that person that just withdrew, that it was me, that was my personality. Wow, I never really forgave myself for the time that I froze because I'm a fighter and I froze. How did I freeze? Well, you don't choose your stress response. It chooses you. You get stuck on, or your window of activation is really narrow when you grow up in the kinds of homes that we all three grew up in, and many of those of you listening grew up in. When you start to realize that that is an automatic response to danger, that you need to take a moment and assess, am I in danger or am I safe? And if you're safe, you can choose to re-regulate that nervous system so that you don't go into fight, flight, freeze, or appease. It's extremely empowering. And individuals begin to realize what you really shared, Michael. And I know for me, I was, again, in my late 50s before I realized that I wasn't a hothead at home because that was a personality trait. I was a hothead at home because that was my trauma response. And it just kind of got stuck on and a really low window of tolerance to set me off. And it felt safe because that's what I'd always done. And now I could choose to look around and say, wow, it's damaging relationships. I'm running through relationships like kind of crazy. It's not really healthy. And I don't really want to be that person. And it was really my son and I, your children change you. And my son and I learned regulation together. I was 56, he was 16. And we had gone up the explosion ladder 1,000 times because you stay in that fight when you're the parent, because I'm the one that's telling you what to do. And I'm going to win this one. And he's bigger than me, but I still stayed in those battles. And I realized that those are a lose-lose situation. I said things, we broke the cycle. I never hurt my son. I never hit my son. I never abused my son, but I did say things that I wish now I could take back. And so did he. And we've now learned to say, we're dysregulated. We need to separate. Even if we can't speak it, we move apart. I need a moment, whatever that is. We re-regulate. Sometimes that regulation is not a poof. You need to be separated for the night. And I'll say to him, are you safe? Can you go to sleep? I feel safe. I can go to sleep. We'll come back and address it at noon tomorrow when we're in our thinking brains. So I love that transformation, that aha moment. And we get a lot of those aha moments, I think.
Yeah, we do. And also, even if we're in a general workshop, we get a lot of people that come up and say, hey, can I speak with you for a moment? And it's that permission to finally tell somebody what happened, which is why we do the work as well, because we know very certainly that very few people, especially children, report what has happened to them. So for us, it's rewarding that someone has taken that first step to be able to say, hey, I can relate to you. Something happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's powerful. One of the things that I'm curious about here, because I think that one of the areas people don't really understand that they can get lost in is the fact that healing, like, I think that sometimes, and it's probably social media, honestly, like people think that it's like, oh, if I go do this, I'm healed and then I'm good to go. And, I'm 16 years into just doing my own personal work now. And there's always like the next thing. And you as experts and having a bit of seniority here over me, what's it like for you today to be healing or in the journey and trying to navigate day-to-day life?
I think for me, it's a realization that Healing is a journey, not a destination, and that I have to give myself grace for those times when I, quote, slip back into a behavior that isn't the best for me. So it's important for me to give myself grace. I was really taken aback during COVID when I put on a mask and went into a grocery store and then found myself curled up in a corner, absolutely out of control and not understanding why. And when I understood that I had had my mouth covered with tape and all kinds of things when I was a child, and that's what had triggered me, I immediately went back into therapy again. But the adult in me and the person that had done years of work said, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you have to go back into therapy again. I can't believe you can't handle this on your own." And I beat myself up. But you know what? Going back into therapy with a new therapist taught me something else. So I think what I would like to say to everyone is it's worth the journey, but it is going to be a journey. It's going to be like, my EMS friend said when I was a EMT and worked in the ER, "Karen, what's this?" I'm like, "Oh, that's the heartbeat. That's life." "Yeah, well, what's this?" "Well, that's death." "Well, okay, life is this then."
Mm-hmm.
And so it was
True.
a huge revelation to me that it's okay if I have to ask others for help. It's okay if I slip. But the most important thing is that I recognize the signs in me. I recognize that I'm in trouble and I need to do something different.
Yes. And remember, I was the walled off person. I'm a high logic brain. You can't get through to me without information, knowledge. Like my therapist gives me books to read first. And, it took a client. We just finished teaching in Topeka Correctional Facility for women. And this was just a couple years ago. Holly looked at me and she said, "Kathleen, why when you talk with the women and we're walking through emotional regulation and self-care and you're sharing all this, why do you just talk about managing trauma? Why don't you talk about healing?" I looked at her and I was like, I need to get back with you on that one. I don't have an answer. And I'm driving home and I'm like, what is healing? I don't even know what healing is. I hadn't even delved into healing. And so I went back to my therapist and I told her this conversation. She handed me a couple books to read. One of them was Stephanie Foo's What My Bones Know, Complex Trauma Survivor. And in it, she talks about discovering love and being able to learn to trust it. And I still didn't completely understand, but I went back into Anne and I had the book and all marked up and all kinds of notes. And I was reading to her passages and she looked at me, she goes, "Well, let me tell you what healing is." She said, "Healing is allowing your authentic self to come through unencumbered by your trauma responses." Healing is allowing your authentic self to come through unencumbered by your trauma response. And I cannot tell you that I understood in that moment, but I wrote it down. I made her say it again. And I have really been working. And as I've discovered, I have lived really almost all of my life as my trauma responses and my coping mechanisms. And I am finally trying to uncover and rediscover that authentic self, those pieces of myself I left behind in my trauma survival and my recovery, and those pieces that give me joy and feed my soul. And I am just now discovering. And so my first one discovery, world watch out, I am a joyous dancer and I love to dance and I never really got to do it. I was 8, I think, the last time I danced. I put it in a closet, and I mean, I had some dances I went to, but I now dance on the dance floor with anyone of any ability, of any color, creed, anything, and I just bring joy. And people will say to me, "You're so much fun. You're so much joy." And I'm like, it's because I love to dance, and I haven't got to do that for 60 years.
I loved the definition of healing when she told me that. And I'm like, look out, Kathleen, though, when you start peeling away all that, you're going to stand naked in front of people. She laughed at me, and I'm like, that's what it feels like.
Yeah.
To put away those pieces of armor and say, who is that person, or who is the person that I was meant to be, and what is my purpose? Because so much of that gets covered up in trauma responses when you're a child that lives the life that we lived.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, that's so close to my definition too, because I've always said this healing journey is getting to the point that you do what you want to do because you want to do it, and you don't do what you don't want to do because you don't want to do it. And that's about authority over and agency over your own life, because there's moments I look back on my life and, you know, being in this massive dysregulation, chaos, whatever's happening in my life, and I think to myself, that is so unrecognizable to the person that I am today. And it's not like that shit doesn't pop. Trust me. I've got to like sit in this and be like, dude, right? But most of my day-to-day life is nothing like 15, 16 years ago. And I think that so much of that is looking at and making the decision to have the ownership of the decision making, which can be really scary because that means now you're in control, and you don't, as much as we want to blame people for what happened to us, the decisions we make today are our decisions. Like I can't sit here and ever blame anyone for Michael's choice to do something stupid, but I can look at it and go, okay, well, why did I do that thing?
Right.
What the hell is happening in my life? Why did I act this way? Why did I operate this way? Why did I blow up at this person? Why did I treat an employee this way? Why did I sans TSA, I'm pretty good at controlling my emotions, right? And so it's like, you know, somebody who travels 200 days a year, let me tell you,
right.
You know,
we get it.
We do.
And so I look at this all and I go, okay, cool. What is required? Like, what does my day have to be in order for me to operate as a healthy individual who has massive goals and runs multiple businesses and is always on the road and has a stable relationship and has stable family and all of these things happening? I'm like, it's really about me doing what I have to do. Because I realized one day, and this was really pivotal. This is a turning point, and I'm curious how this experience may have happened for you or not. I realized that life has nothing to do with what you want to do. It has everything about you doing what is required. Because I want nothing more to do than to get high and play video games and eat pizza and hook up with strangers and whatever that looks like. That's I don't know why. It's part of my nomenclature as a human being. But then I look at the life that I actually want to have, not the things I want to have, but the life I want to have. And the life that I want to have is this: amazing conversations, speaking on stages, running a successful business, looking at myself in the mirror and being okay with the reflection. I'm like, all of that is based in requirement for me to treat myself like somebody who gives a shit about themselves. Point blank, period. So what does that mean? I got to do yoga. I got to meditate. I got to write in the stupid journal for the 50th time this month. I've got to go to the personal development events and show up to therapy and have a coach. And I have to do all the things that I find to be the requirement and the precursor to what I actually want. And then the other part of it is I have to live into being the person that I believe that I am. Not the person who was set up for failure, who statistically should be dead or in jail like many of his friends and most of his family. It's like, great, well, how do I have to operate today? Well, it's like, you have to give a shit about yourself. Well, what does that mean? It means yoga, meditation, don't get high, don't watch porn, don't hook up with strangers, don't do these things. Instead, do these things over here. And it's funny because one day I took a piece of paper and a pen. I literally just wrote a line down the middle. I said, right at the top, what fucks my life up? What makes my life better?
There we go.
Dead serious. And I just started going for it. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts about this idea that you have to do what is required to have the life that you want to have? Like, how does that land? What does that look like? How do you see that in your lives? How do you see that with the people that you work?
Well, I would say that something I said to Kathleen the other night when we were watching a trauma show, and we were discussing childhoods and everything, was that, some people say, well, it would be easier not to learn these things and easier not to tell myself I had to do what's required. But then I looked at her and said, well, ignorance is bliss.
True.
And, it is easier to be in that blissful world where you get to do what you want to do and you get to do what your habits are and everything else. But does that work well for your life? And does that make your life easier and your goals more attainable? No. So what you have to do, I love what you said, is what's required.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard work, and you have to remind yourself on a daily basis, but it's so worth it.
I'm still thinking about this. It's a little bit like that healing question. So, Michael, I'm going to have to think on this one a little bit. But from I just run in this high logic. We were watching something last night on the heart, and I'm like, oh, whatever. I run in my brain, and I just always have.
I'm logic guy.
Okay, and I've protected my heart, and I still do. And so for me, when I was 5, I cannot even tell you in words, there are no words, how important it was for me to be told that I was going to make a difference and how much that has driven my life. People will say to me, and I'm talking driven my life, and I've given my life to making a difference on behalf of the common good, on behalf of those most vulnerable in our communities, on behalf of something greater than myself. I have done that since I was 5 years old. In this reflection, I had to ask myself kind of what as I went back through and started peeling away the trauma responses and the coping mechanisms and literally seeing, I got nothing left. I got nothing, and I'm 65 years old. I looked at that trauma response of driven by purpose, and I said, no, I chose that some 20 years ago, that I would leave now, oh gosh, almost 40 years ago, long time ago. Time passes as you get older. When I left the investment management world, because I was good at it. I have a finance brain, but it didn't feed my soul the way that I knew I needed. And it didn't allow me to make the difference that I knew that voice, I call it the mystery, the universe gave to me, that directive. And I shifted my life. I left that industry. I started my own business. I joined with 2 people that had worked all around the world at a kind of private Peace Corps, and I dedicated my life to helping organizations that serve the most vulnerable in our communities be as strategic and effective and efficient as they could be, and eventually as trauma-informed as they could be. And that leads me, and as long as I'm doing things that allow me to do that, I have to tell you, for me, that is what I was supposed to be doing. And so it doesn't feel required. When I start to feel sorry for myself a little bit, I'm like, oh my gosh, I haven't worked 40 days of my life for 40 years of my life. I've got to do my passion, and I've got to do what I'm supposed to do. So doing this work, and I do this work only in bits. I do a sprint and then I back out.
Mm-hmm.
And then I do a sprint and I back out. I have to be careful because I want to stay where I am and stay steady. And then I got to do a dive, and then I've got to come back up and just steady the ship, because I want to keep doing this work. Mm-hmm. I want to keep doing this purpose. So I don't know, for me, I've been so purpose driven for so long and didn't understand the full context when I was 5, but it's evolved as I've, spent the last 60 years, and it just is why I exist. Now, picking up the pieces that I dropped was very, I got a little depressed when there was nothing there. And I did this little exercise we do. I did a little decades of my life. And I realized, okay, it's not that hard to pick up dancing. I picked up a fur baby. I love animals. But it can be scary and lonely. And I'm just so grateful I have my sister to be in that journey. So I don't know if that helps, but it's kind of where my healing journey has taken me. And again, I am unbelievably grateful to the universe for having rescued me when I was 5. It really, that for me was a difference maker.
Yeah,
It
that's powerful.
didn't take the trauma away, but
No.
it walled me off. It gave me a memory eraser, and it gave me purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very powerful. I mean, both of your story, and again, kind of the point of where I thought we would go is two very different experiences, similar outcomes. You know, and
Yeah.
I look at my brothers, and I have the ironclad memory. Even to this day, it's almost photogenic. I remember literally everything. Like I'll remember your blue flowered shirt till I'm dead. You know, it's weird. It's actually quite annoying. But
It is quite annoying.
what I've
Very annoying.
I know. I'm great at trivia though. So,
Yeah.
you know, but I think about the fact I look at the relationships with my siblings now, and I don't think they'll ever be perfect. I don't think that anyone's sibling relationships are, but at least we don't punch each other in the face anymore. And, you know, and we get to have amazingly deep conversations, and we've gone to personal development events together, and we've done the work together, and life is just amazing. And, you know, my thought is so often it's like, if this is what's required, this is what's required, because at least I got this. Before I ask you the last question, where can everyone find you? Where can everyone learn more? And especially where can people do work with you?
We have a website, remarkably-resilient.com. Lots of information there. We have a place where you can buy our book, where you can buy our Remarkably Resilient Together materials. And we're launching this summer a learning management system. So where you can also purchase and watch online videos and PDF files. So please visit. We have some free resources there as well, and also our contact information. So thank you for that, Michael.
Yeah. Amazing. And guys, remember, go to thinkunbrokenpodcast.com for that and more in the show notes for today's episode. My last question for you, my friends, what does it mean to you to be unbroken?
What it means for me is to continue my journey and know that it's worth it. And then to be very proud of the courageous things I've done along the way to choose me. Like set boundaries, like put myself at a level that I'm with someone else instead of below. The kind of things that I learned along the way. And then the other part was to know that we broke that cycle and that I did not pass that on to my children. And I was very proud of the fact that they did not experience the things that I experienced.
Yeah. I think for me, it means the journey that I've finally have stepped into, and that's that healing journey, recognizing that you are not your trauma responses. You are not your unhealthy coping mechanisms. They are simply tools for survival. Thank them, be grateful they were there, but really look at, can I set them aside? And sometimes I've been able to do that on my own. And sometimes I need support and help from professionals, from my sister to be able to do that. And so I don't feel broken anymore. I feel like I understand why I had those traits, what they were necessary for, but I love the empowerment of being able to choose differently and to understand how to do that.
Thank you for being here, Unbroken Nation. Thank you all for listening. If today's conversation was insightful and you have siblings and they grew up in the house that you grew up in, and maybe you know that they need to do a little bit of work, I have learned one thing to be true. I cannot make anyone do anything, but I can plant some seeds. And this episode might just be that for them. Maybe you send it to them and say, hey, I heard this today. You might want to consider listening to it. Or maybe you sit on them and make them listen to it. I don't know. You have to do what you got to do.
They did that.
But my hope is that you understand that on the backside of all the things that you may have gone through, that there is something beautiful waiting for you if you're willing to show up and do this work, to ask for help, to look in the mirror, and most importantly, to say, I can do this. Until next time, my friends, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and be unbroken. I'll see ya.
Most people don't realize how much their personal information is being bought and sold every day. Data brokers are making billions, pulling details about you from public records and the internet, and then packaging and selling it, usually without your consent. That's how your information lands in the hands of scammers, spammers, even stalkers. It's why you get endless robocalls and why ads seem to follow you everywhere. That's where Aura comes in. Aura actively removes your data from broker sites and keeps it off. They also instantly alert you if your information shows up in a breach or on the dark web. But Aura goes beyond data protection. With one app, you get a VPN, antivirus, password manager, spam call protection, dark web monitoring, and even up to $5 million in identity theft insurance, all backed by 24/7 US-based fraud support. Other companies might sell just credit monitoring or just a VPN. Aura gives you all of it, together, at the same price competitors charge for just one service. Start your free trial today at aura.com/remove. Protect yourself now at aura.com/remove.